Okay, I think we'll get started. Just gone 9 o'clock. Hello, and a very warm welcome to everyone, wherever you may be in the world today. My name is Nick Farmer, and I'm an international tax partner here at Menzies. And today we're going to be talking about doing business in Australia. I'm joined by a fantastic group of people who are going to give some insights on this particular business channel. Let me just run through who is on the webinar today. So we've got Joelle from HLB Mann Judd, our key accounting business partner in Australia. Joelle joins us from Melbourne. Then we've got Colin and Roxana from OCO Global, a foreign direct investment specialist. And then also Demetrio and Alexandria from Law Squared, based. Demetrio's in Melbourne and Alexandra in the UK. So very warm welcome, and thank you, Joelle and Demetrio, for staying with us this evening. Great to have you on the call. So just to set the scene, why are we talking about Australia? Well, it's actually a really key market. We see a lot of our clients looking to do business in Australia. Maybe they're retailers in healthcare sector, cosmetics, had some architectural firms trading down there. So really key market for a number of our clients. It's a fairly easy market to do business in as well. Looking at the World Bank ranking, last time that was put out, it ranked number 14 out of 190. So pretty high. Not to be competitive, the UK was 8, so just matching. They're pretty similar markets in terms of sort of ease of doing business. I think that's one of the attractions there. And, you know, clearly a sort of language, culture, sort of business sort of basis between the countries. And, you know, it's actually a fairly large market as well, 25 million people there, 60% in 4 key cities in Australia. So it's a fairly easy market to target as well. And, you know, crucially, there is also a free trade agreement that has been signed between the countries, not finally ratified. It was the first one that the UK signed post-Brexit, and once ratified, that will, of course, open up the market even further. So what are we going to do today? Well, I think initially we're going to look at the opportunities between the countries. We're then going to run into some of the tax and legal questions that we regularly get asked, and also have a Q&A as well. So if you do have any questions, please do post those into the chat, and either we'll pick them up as we go along, or hopefully we'll have some time at the end as well. So I think the key intention is to really give you an overview of doing business in Australia, and you know, an understanding of where to turn when you have any questions. Before we get started, I think we'd like to just launch a quick poll just to understand who is actually in the room and where you are on your journey of doing business in Australia. So just give you a moment to answer that poll. Okay. Really quite helpful that, actually, because it definitely demonstrates that most people are sort of either active in the market, trading with the market, or considering the market. So, you know, obviously a key sort of interest in the market, and people perhaps with some familiarity of doing business in the market. So I think to start with, anyway, we'd like to just look at the opportunities that are presented with trading with Australia, and hence I think it would be good to hear from Colin and Roxana in relation to what their experience is and what they're seeing in terms of sectors and the kind of opportunities that are there for UK exporters. So perhaps over to you, Colin.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Hi, everybody. So, yeah, my name is Colin McCullagh. I'm on the senior management team at OCO Global. For your benefit, OCO Global is a specialist consulting firm that work in really specifically in internationalization, so helping companies to expand overseas. So we work directly with companies, but also with governments. So we are a trusted partner to DIT in the UK, but we're also, being a trusted partner to Austrade as well. And so we're coming at it from a perspective where we've supported companies who are just looking to export, and also companies that have been looking to expand and land into Australia. And Roxana is going to give a couple of specific examples around that. So I'm just going to set the scene a little bit. So in terms of what we do with helping companies, we really help that whole suite from sort of market research through to sort of market entry strategy, and into actually doing the sort of business development, partner search, etc., right through to where should we set up in the world. So that's our sort of, that's what we do. Why is Australia interesting? So it is said to be the world's 12th largest economy, and I think sometimes we can forget that. But it's set to be the 12th largest economy in 2023. It's home to just 0.3% of the world's population, but it accounts for 1.7% of the global economy. So it is significant, and I think it's more significant than we sometimes think. Interestingly, it's the 9th highest GDP per capita in the world as well. So we're talking, reasonably affluent country as well. As Nick had mentioned, it's actually gone up to 13th in the World Bank's ease of doing business. And we like that a lot. And I think when we help companies around the world, we do look at that a lot, because, you want it to be sort of not so difficult and a little bit more familiar. So it is. But there's a couple of other things I really like about Australia. First one is it's actually third in the world for workforce diversity. Which I actually wouldn't have necessarily thought about Australia, but there you go, it is, and I think that's really, really interesting. And the one I love here is it's the second top economy for seizing opportunity from disruptive forces. So for me, that is all about innovation. It's all about, early adoption, right? And I think that says a lot about the sort of Australia mindset, the government, and the capability. And Roxana is going to touch a little bit on that to actually sort of show the evidence of that and where they are actually, working across private, public to drive sort of leadership and innovation in key areas. Okay, so just as the UK is actually Australia's 6th largest importer, so it's a very well established sort of trading partner, and then Australia is UK's 15th largest export market. So I think there is room for growth in that regard. Some of the top imports, a lot of services, as you can imagine. So business professional services would be sort of the highest sort of sectors, and then when it comes to good, life sciences is pretty high up there. So pharma, medical devices, etc. And then the likes of consumer goods and automotive is pretty high as well. All right. So, and as Nick mentioned, look, they signed the UK-Australia Free Trade Agreement in December. There's been a bit of, I don't know, you've seen, but there's a little bit of press around that, where I think Australia has benefited more than the UK on that front. But I don't think there's any UK farmers on the call, so we should be okay. But there is, in a serious note, tariff-free export of goods does help a lot, right? And the movement of people makes it really interesting as well. So that provides a foundation for both goods and services to make trading easier. Okay. So why is it interesting? I guess there's a couple of reasons for as well. Is that it is a strategic location, right, for on the doorstep of Asia. So Australia would compete against like Singapore, but I think it feels a little bit more familiar, and is a good place to open up that region. And also, amazingly, I knew there was a lot of Brits in Australia, but there's more than 1 million Britons in Australia. So again, it's not going to be that difficult to open doors and to get access, etc. as well. So it's a sort of favourable economy for the UK. So I'm just going to touch quickly on some of the sectors that we're seeing, and then Roxana will go a little bit deeper than that. So on the e-commerce side, it's actually the 11th largest e-commerce market in the world, and it represents approximately 9% of all retail in Australia. So again, quite advanced on that front. Cybersecurity It's really emerging. They're putting a lot of money and effort into cyber. It's looking to triple over the next 4 years. So really, real big investment into cyber. And then general technology, it contributes 6.6% to Australia's GDP. They're investing in AI, virtual augmented reality, and then actually quantum, which Roxana will touch on as well. And then huge investment into sort of smart cities and infrastructure. So again, $100 billion going into transport infrastructure. So looking, we've got UK is fantastic for its engineering services, advanced systems, etc. So again, we're seeing good opportunities there as well. And then of course, let's not forget, Australia obviously is quite big on some of its like LNG and some of its gas, but it's the renewable side. It accounted for sort of 32.5% of electricity in 2021, but they're aiming to make it sort of 80% of the mix in 2030. So really strong move towards renewables, which is really interesting. Okay, so that's the sort of top line picture, I guess, and I think for people wanting to do business there, obviously, look, time zones do make it challenging, right? And also the distribution of the cities. I think 3/5 of the population live in the 4 cities, so it is good in that way in some regard in targeting specific cities. But if you're looking to service the market, you need to think about where you need to be. So some of the things we help companies with in that regard. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Roxana, who's going to talk a little bit about her experience working alongside Austrian in helping UK companies to access the market. So Roxana, over to you.
Thank you, Colin. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. So my name is Roxana Gonzalez, and I'm a senior project manager at OCO Global. And as Colin mentioned, I've worked alongside the Australian Trade and Investment Commission for the last 1.5 years, looking at some of kind of these key sectors, emerging sectors, and also where we're seeing the traction for UK companies to not just set up there, but also just create local partnerships. So I think from a Australian government perspective, I think the kind of focus is trying to increase capacity and capability within specific industries where there are gaps within their economy. And these mean mainly high innovative tech sectors where British firms can take advantage of. Now, if you're bringing in a capability that Australia is investing in on a government perspective and developing, then there are opportunities for local collaborations and partnerships. They're very, very interested in this like transfer of knowledge and, edge-cutting sectors like quantum, for example, where there's this really strong partnership between government and academia and kind of a strong pull to bring in international organizations and talents to help with that capability. So as Colin briefly mentioned, energy and circular economy is a priority for their national agenda. So some government initiatives on that is that the Australian government is investing $20 billion from 2020 to 2030 to support low emissions and technologies building. That includes clean hydrogen, energy storage, solar, green steel, and green and steel aluminum. They're also investing $1.3 billion in the Modern Manufacturing Initiative, which includes grants for businesses to support innovation in resources technology and critical minerals, food and beverage, medical products, recycling and clean energy, and defense and space. And then a good example of a UK company that has indirectly benefited from a Modern Manufacturing Initiative is Plastic Energy. So UK-based Plastic Energy is a global leader in chemical recycling, offering sustainable solutions to help prevent plastic waste. And they've actually partnered with Australia's only manufacturer of polymers and advanced chemicals. The company is called Kenos, K-E-N-O-S. And they're basically working with them in their Kenos Circular Plastics Project, or shorter QCPP. The QCPP, which is supported by the Victoria State Government, is a deep dive study to create new capabilities in the sector for Australia. And this project is actually the largest proposed circular plastics project in Australia, the largest study. And it's really exciting to see a British firm at the forefront, working with local partners to get this off the ground. And one of the main things is Kenos received one of these modern manufacturing initiative, which then allowed them to kind of bring in that local partner. So, I mean, that international partner, sorry. So Plastics Energy came in and they're helping and supporting the capabilities. And this goes towards addressing the challenge of plastic waste and to meet the country's national packaging targets. So here we're seeing a lot of, kind of government support to bridge that gap between industry and government collaboration. And what are those initiatives that the government, is really looking to put forward, like a lot of other countries, obviously green initiatives are at the forefront. Another example of kind of initiatives and government partnership is in September 2021, the Australia, United Kingdom, and the US agreed upon a new trilateral security partnership, the AUKUS security partnership. And then under this alliance, there's kind of a focus on long-term opportunities between the three nations to kind of focus on cyber capabilities, which, as Colin mentioned, that's why there's so much focus on cybersecurity as well, AI and quantum technologies. Just a quick kind of point on quantum. So yeah, there's a huge push. I got this a lot working with Austrade. They put it on their national strategy. They've got a quantum strategy for 2025. And it includes an investment of 70 million for the quantum commercialization hub. And this hub will be supported by the development of the quantum strategy. And so the way that we see these initial areas, for opportunities for UK companies is to kind of partner with some local, academia, research organizations to kind of get it off the ground, as they know that, Australia is behind quantum when they compare it to the UK. So they're really interested to kind of bring in that transfer of knowledge. So we see, UK organizations and UK companies partnering with, say, the Australian Research Council and other research centers for R&D and commercialization of these opportunities. Now, another kind of example of a company that we supported along with Plastic Energy is UK-based Soft Iron. So Soft Iron is an IT and software company, and they make software for data centers, helping them to process their data faster. So initially, when we were working with them, they were looking for local partners to kind of enter the market and build those on-the-ground relationships, with their end goal down the line to kind of be to set up a back office in Australia and then do some exporting from there to the APAC region. However, things kind of developed quite quickly because there is kind of a big interest in this sector, and also the back of this AUKUS agreement. It was just yesterday, fresh off the press, that this company that we helped, Soft Iron, they actually inaugurated Australia's first ever component level IT infrastructure manufacturing facility in Sydney. And this was possible because they actually received an innovation grant from the Australia's Defence Centre, and the grant provided up to 70% of the project cost. So there, as you can see, there's a big push for the government, putting initiatives, but also putting money behind these initiatives to help this, knowledge, transfer of knowledge, but also hopefully set up, like Soft Iron did. So it's just an extension of their UK facility. And again, we're just seeing more transfer of knowledge between the two countries. So I think my main kind of big takeaway is whatever your industry is, look at maybe some of the initiatives that are being put forward by the government, because that's kind of like where the money is going. And maybe you're not looking to set up there, but you can indirectly benefit from some of those grants and initiatives through local partnerships. So yeah, I think that's it for me. If you have any questions on maybe some of the other sectors or other government initiatives that are being put forward, I'll drop my email and yeah, let me know. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for that. And it's really insightful just to hear about the opportunities in the market and some of the ways in which UK business are taking advantage of them. Dimitri, I just wanted to pick up on one thing that Colin touched on around this free trade agreement. And I know we talked about that a little bit when you were in London. Perhaps you can just sort of explain where that sort of got to, and maybe some of the things which are sitting in there which will make a difference going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much, Nick, and thanks everyone. It's great to be here. It's nighttime here for us, so I appreciate you all joining us for your morning. As Colin alluded to, the free trade agreement was actually the UK's first FTA that was agreed post-Brexit, obviously pretty significant. As Colin also referred to, Australia and the UK, the UK is Australia's 6th largest trading partner. So for us, it obviously has a very big emphasis as a country, and we see a lot of value there. And I'm sure those of you who are based in the UK, which is probably all of you, everybody knows an Australian. So it's a familiar territory place for us, and often a bit of a rite of passage for many Australians, particularly post-university or early in their careers, to move across to the UK. What the free trade agreement does is actually makes that a little bit easier for particularly professional services to move across. As Colin also referred to, the kind of biggest export is services into the UK. And so we have lawyers, accountants, and others who really end up coming into the UK for those initial experiences. One of the key benefits is that it will increase the age of which it allows for that freer movement to 35 years of age. We did previously have a 2-year limit of younger people, I suppose, under the age of 30 who are travelling into the UK on a restricted visa in respect of that. One of the key things also we see is a mutual recognition under certain professions. So lawyers, for example, will be able to, in some time, seek a better mutual recognition between both countries rather than coming into the UK or vice versa, coming to Australia and having to re-qualify, which is quite a hurdle at the moment. Unfortunately, there are 3 steps. So whilst the FTA has been agreed to and signed by both governments, it actually now needs to be passed by both parliaments. There's been a delay on both sides for particularly obvious reasons in the UK, but we hope that that will come in to the first quarter of next year. But once it is signed, we then need to think about what the implementation looks like. And I think whilst governments have been very excited and pushing for the signing, there isn't quite a mechanism yet in relation to the implementation. So, for example, from a solicitor's perspective, we require the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, which is the governing regulator in the UK, to communicate with the 7 different regulator bodies that we have here in Australia from a solicitor's perspective to kind of agree on a uniform approach for a mutual qualification. As you can all appreciate, it's going to take some time. But as Roxana said, there are some key industries, particularly around energy, where we're seeing some mutual recognition and benefits. Also in relation to financial services, the governments have actually worked very closely together, particularly over the COVID and pre-COVID periods for mutual recognition of a sandbox rule. So allowing financial services companies or fintech companies to kind of operate within a regulatory framework, even though they may not be registered in that framework within a certain sandbox. So certainly lots of opportunities, and we are looking forward to the ratification and then, of course, implementation. But I'm afraid it could be a little bit longer than what we all hoped.
Yeah, and I think also, clearly tariffs are a bigger issue, and the sort of liberalisation of the trade and the removal of tariff barriers between the countries. I think a very high proportion of those will be eliminated once that free trade agreement actually comes into place. Now, Joelle, I mean, we obviously share a lot of mutual clients, and you help us companies that are looking to do business in Australia. We talked a little bit here about the ease of doing business in Australia. So when a UK company is looking to take advantage of these opportunities and to trade in the market, what are the key things up front that are important for them, do you feel, to know about entering the market from a sort of a tax and a business point of view?
Thank you, Nick. Hello, everyone. As Nick said, my name's Joelle. I'm a business advisory partner at HLB Mann, Judd, and part of what I do is help businesses set up in Australia. And part of this and part of the process that we go through is look at the business strategy when they're entering Australia, just to understand what they're hoping to achieve, how long they would like to be in Australia, what sort of networks do they need to succeed. And part of that is then coming up with a particular structure that will suit the business. We provide back office solutions to help support them so that they have an efficient and a generally lower cost structure to enter the market, so they're not burdened with significant costs when they're coming into the market. And overall, we provide the tax and the business structuring. So a common question is just looking at what type of structure people need when they enter the Australian market and set up business here in Australia, there's generally two main options that businesses look at, and that's registering a foreign business in Australia as a branch and an extension of their foreign parent, and they would register with ASIC and the ATO and have an Australian footprint, but it's generally the parent entity that is registered here. An alternative and more common option is that businesses set up an Australian company, a foreign subsidiary here, and it's usually wholly owned or the majority owned by a parent entity. It is quite practical, as you say, referred to Nick, that it's quite practical to set up in Australia. It doesn't actually take too long to go through the processing and setting up the actual business here. What you do need to set up is an Australian resident director, as well as an Australian public officer. Our corporate tax rates are either 25% or 30%, depending on the size of your business. And in addition to audit requirements, generally speaking, foreign businesses are required to be audited here in Australia, but we do have audit exemptions available to them. So whilst their consolidated revenue is below 50 million and their employees are less than 100, they can generally apply for an audit exemption, which enables them to just prepare the usual financials and the tax lodgements. From a corporate perspective, one other, just going on and following on Roxana's presentation, we have the R&D tax offset, which is helpful for businesses looking to innovate here in Australia, and that's available to businesses here, private businesses, as well as various innovation grants and various grants just to support businesses that come here to enable them to build their business and have a successful business here.
And Joelle, what are the typical timelines on something like this? When someone's looking to come into the market, we're talking there about setting up a legal entity in Australia. How long does that sort of typically take to get the entity established and perhaps, operational to start trading in Australia?
We've just introduced in Australia the director ID process. So that's at the point that each director actually has their director ID process in place, you can become operational within, say, a month. Once the ABN is applied for and the company set up, it's quite quick to set up a company within a couple of days. It's just waiting for the registration. So usually allow a month to 6 weeks, but in the lead up, ensure the director ID process is started.
Yeah, and I know one big challenge in reverse when coming into the UK, companies often struggle with the sort of banking side of things and the client due diligence that has to take place. I presume that's no different in Australia.
Yes, that's right. That's right, Nick. So usually the company has the benefit of the Australian resident director to start the process with the banking requirements and the disclosures required.
Yeah. And perhaps, Alexandra, you might sort of pitch in here, because I know you're sort of helping UK companies go into Australia, and we're talking about setting up that legal entity there. And there's a key difference that's already been mentioned about needing a local director. Perhaps you can sort of explain a little bit more about that Australian entity and what it sort of involves setting it up from a legal perspective.
I'll actually throw it to you on that one. my area is more commercial than corporate, so I'll take it.
Yeah, happy to jump in. I suppose, as Joelle said, really there are the two options, which are registering as a foreign branch, essentially, or a foreign corporation here in Australia, or registering as a private company, which is wholly owned by a foreign entity. There is, of course, the public route, and there are reasons why certain businesses may choose to come to Australia to list on the Australian Stock Exchange, but I think for the purposes here, we'll kind of focus on the others. There are, of course, other ways to enter the market, and that could be by way of a partnership, or it could be leveraging channel partnerships. We often see, particularly technology companies that come into Australia and they use like a channel partnership model without actually setting up full presences here, just to kind of test the market. That's not an uncommon way to do it. Obviously, having some really sound legal agreements in place is very important there. But it is a nice way to kind of just test what is happening. There, of course, if businesses don't want to set up a full subsidiary at an early stage in their journey, they can look at an employer of record type model as well, which essentially allows for an individual to be employed by another organization or corporate as they go about. Often we see that in sales roles or marketing roles, just to test the market without making those initial investments. As Joel said, it is pretty quick. You can set up a company here and commence trading within 4 weeks or so. The biggest barriers usually are banking, as Joel also mentioned. And I suppose we see, back to my comment before around fintech businesses that are doing really well, and we have some great Australian businesses that are offering kind of virtual bank accounts, for example, and that is giving a quick entry into the market as opposed to some of the traditional barriers that we're seeing. And there are still obviously AML requirements around that, but speaking from experience, it took us 9+ months to get a bank account. Obviously, we're already trading in the UK, so we need to find a solution. So one of the great things about leveraging technology and some of the great innovations that we have not only in our country but also in the UK means that we can leverage these things and use them for our advantage. So lots of quick ways to enter into the market, I suppose. That's kind of the common theme here, which is, yes, you can go through the full route of registering a company, but there are of course others. As Joel said, one of the hurdles and one of the differences, I suppose, between registering a private company here in Australia compared to the UK is the need to have a resident director here. And the test for a resident director is ordinarily resides. And there's a whole series of cases that will determine what ordinarily resides means. But it's fair to say somebody who often is an Australian citizen and is living in Australia will meet that test. And there are certainly individuals who offer that as a service for businesses who don't have somebody here in Australia who could be that resident director. For example, just because you have a salesperson or a marketing person on the ground here, they may not necessarily want to take on that role of being a director. So a couple of really good ways to enter into the market, as we've flagged. They're not big hurdles to jump. And again, a really good opportunity to kind of test what the market may be like here for a certain product and or service before really making that investment.
And Dimitri, just in relation to that company, are there any sort of minimum levels of share capital that people need to put in? Do those accounts, when they're prepared, go on public record? What's the sort of wider sort of situation of having a company there?
Yeah, of course. So ASIC, which is the Australian Securities Investment Commission, is essentially our company's house, if you like, the UK equivalent. And all that information is public information, being name, date of birth, residential address, business address, and also a registered office. As Joel said, an organisation like HLB will offer back-end services, which allows HLB to act as a registered office for particularly foreign entities coming in. You can work out how many shares you want a company. You could issue a company with only has one share, or it could be as many as 10,000 or more. The value of a share, of course, must be more than at least a cent. So traditionally, we would say set up a company. If it's wholly owned subsidiary, then you would only have minimal shares owned by that. But as Joel said, it's very important to understand why you're coming to the Australian market, how long do you plan on being here, what is the long-term goal here. And once you understand the strategy, you can then build the company foundations around that. You don't want to run into an issue where there are tax implications by virtue of having to issue new shares down the track or seeking alternative investment or other routes. So spending the time and investment in understanding why you're coming to this market, the structure in which you should come into this market is pretty critical. And again, which is often why we see businesses who are just testing the waters before they make that initial commitment and investment.
Yeah, and that's worth just looking at, because we see that as well. Obviously, UK companies looking to expand overseas are not quite sure if the market's going to work for them. Therefore, they just want to test whether it is, and they put somebody on the ground to operate and to see if there's opportunities they can take advantage of. So there's this business expansion as businesses grow. Joel, just picking up on that, obviously, one of the key issues is, when does that UK company start to get a tax presence there in Australia? So they can only do so much before, I'm sure, the ATO, the Australian Tax Office, start to get interested in that company, maybe from a corporation tax, a business tax, or a payroll tax, or even a GST perspective. perhaps you can just sort of talk through sort of that kind of issue that arises.
So just from Dimitri's, following on from Dimitri's point, that when a business sets up an Australian subsidiary company, they automatically have a resident company. So at that point, they have what's considered a tax presence in Australia. So they're required to have prepare a tax return and have a tax exposure here in Australia. One of the benefits of having a lighter touch presence in Australia initially is using the registered foreign business approach, potentially, if they're looking at having or prior to actually having a permanent establishment here. So where businesses are perhaps just sending through a salesperson just to assess the market or review the opportunities within Australia without actually contracting here in Australia, that gives them the opportunity without actually sort of triggering the tax reporting and the Australian reporting obligations. So there's a point within the business journey that they actually have that business presence, and part of what we do is sort of understand what the company would like to do, what the business would like to do, and work out the process, how they could actually assess the Australian market without actually triggering the tax requirements until they're actually ready to set up business here.
Yeah, and it's obviously worth mentioning there is a tax treaty here between the UK and Australia that actually sets out what that threshold is. So from a technical point of view, we know it as a permanent establishment, as you mentioned, and typically that arises in two ways. Either a UK company has a fixed place of business in Australia, they open an office down there, and they've got that kind of physical presence in the market, or they have people on the ground that are contracting with customers in that local market. They're the two typical ways that a UK company will sort of get pulled into the Australian market and have a tax presence there.
That's right. Or it may be a long-term type construction contract that may exceed, say, 12 months. And at that point, that's when you're at the stage where the business is considered or typically considered as having a tax present. So how we approach these scenarios is just understanding what the business is, the plan in Australia, and sort of working through just so that they are aware of when they're actually likely to trigger tax implications and reporting requirements here in Australia. Now, from a financial statements perspective, providing the company has applied for audit exemptions in terms of subsidiaries here in Australia. There's audit exemptions, and they're actually exempt from the audit of the financial statements as well as lodgement of the financial information. And that also provides peace of mind for businesses that are starting here, that they don't necessarily need to disclose their numbers and the financial information on the public register. It's still a private reporting to the ATO until they reach those higher thresholds. So that's just something else to consider, which gives companies peace of mind when they're setting up as well, that it's not on the public register.
Yeah, understood. And just going back to you then, Alexandra, you're here in the UK helping UK companies, and obviously Dimitri is there in Australia, so you've got that sort of span between the two countries to be able to help UK businesses navigate this from a legal perspective. What are these key commercial issues that you'll be talking to those businesses about?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the kind of overarching perspective, the legal system and the kind of commercial operating system in Australia is really quite similar to the UK. I think businesses that kind of operate here in compliance will be quite used to the kinds of reporting and the kinds of compliance that they need to do in Australia. And, you know, in many cases, they're actually less stringent in Australia. So a good example of that is kind of the privacy compliance. I know it's a huge thing when Australian businesses are expanding to the UK and having to kind of, you know, upgrade all of their privacy systems to comply with the GDPR. Obviously, businesses that have been operating here, will be very used to those kind of controls, and then going back into Australia, it's kind of a less stringent kind of system, but still something that businesses need to comply with on both sides, because obviously when you're transferring from the UK to Australia in a new way, you've got your compliance things that you need to do on this side for the GDPR, and then also kind of getting all of your documents and kind of back of house things in order for that operation in Australia. So there's usually kind of a process that you need to do just kind of practically to kind of get all of your documents, your customer agreements and any of your trading documents in compliance with Australian law. Again, a lot of those things that we're looking for are quite similar in both. We have a similar competition and consumer protection scheme in Australia to what they have in the UK, and a similar kind of unfair contract terms regime. It's all kind of similar. So the things that we're looking for are the same, and they won't, in a lot of cases, they won't be new concepts to UK businesses. They'll be concepts that you're familiar with from trading in the UK. It's obviously just that kind of compliance piece of ticking the box, making sure that your documents reflect compliance with the Australian market, and kind of just making sure that you've done that process of ensuring that your documents, but also your back of house actual operations kind of do what they need to do on a compliance things. So there will be some kind of compliance costs in the initial establishment, and then obviously there are sector specific, again, just like there is in the UK, there are sector specific areas that you need to be aware of. So things like financial services are more regulated, things like healthcare, and if you're importing therapeutic goods, there's some registration, some compliance requirements here. In Australia for those as well. So, but that will all be stuff that UK businesses are used to doing on the UK side. It's kind of, just making sure you're having that transparency with the regulators, being proactive, and that often, I think as Joelle mentioned, kind of starting that process early, kind of understanding what your requirements are, kind of pre-launch or pre-establishment. So that you're kind of ready to go when you're on the market. We kind of do see some people scrambling to get their documents in order once they've got their first big customer, and that's never a kind of pleasant place to be in. So being proactive with all of those requirements, can help you just make that a smoother transition. And as Dimitri mentioned, working with a channel partner or some other kind of local partner can really help with that kind of that knowledge share as well from their operations, can be really invaluable to businesses that are kind of expanding into the market for the first time.
Yeah. And similar to the UK, clearly there are specific regulations for specific sectors. And so people need to sort of understand their particular market and those local regulations. And I presume from what you're saying, you're here in the UK able to help those UK businesses actually navigate what will be particular to them.
Yeah, that's right. And so I think what we enjoy doing and what we're kind of best placed to do is providing that kind of dual jurisdictional support from a time zone that's convenient. So obviously most of my practice has been in Australia, and I can kind of talk to businesses here on their Australian requirements from a convenient meeting time, but also just providing that kind of full picture. I think so often businesses, when they start to expand in different countries, have quite fractured support because they have their accountants here and their lawyers there, and they don't often talk to each other. So kind of having that dual jurisdictional support where you get someone who knows what you're trying to do in the UK market, knows what you're trying to do in Australia, and kind of has that full oversight can be really helpful just to, again, smooth that process. Anything that you can do to kind of even out the bumps, there are inevitably going to be some roadblocks and some things that come up and some challenges that you didn't foresee when you're expanding to a new market. That's going to happen. But just having that kind of support to even out those and try and anticipate them and get on top of them where you can is going to make it a much less stressful process.
Yeah, understood. And Colin, maybe I can just sort of drop back to you, because both Dimitri and Alexandra have mentioned about these different kind of business models, the fact that sometimes it's good to work with a channel partner, sometimes you'll set up your own subsidiary. What's your experience there, the kind of models that you're seeing UK companies develop when they are looking to go overseas?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yeah, look, I think Dimitri really touched on it. I think when we look at sort of companies expanding, that you look at those sort of key things, don't you, about cost, risk, speed, basically. And they're sort of key elements in regardless of the market. What we're seeing, we're working with a few companies at the minute, specifically into Australia. And look, the partner model definitely seems to be one that is, favoured, let's say, so that they can get, because a lot of technology firms, it is quite a standard approach to market, finding good partners in market. We do see as well that sort of the salesperson going over as well, or setting up a salesperson using the employer record. That's now become very easy and very common, so you can develop that market. So it's a little bit about reducing risk, validating and speed to market, really. But what we tend to see is the ones that are really committed and strategically committed, they would quickly move to setting something up a little bit more significant. I think in regardless of the market, particularly in Australia, where there is that sort of distance, that sort of stuff, I think you do need to have that local presence to really grow the market and to satisfy customers. Always look at risk as well, right, when they're buying. So the more you can reduce the risk, right, the more likely buyers are to buy from you. I think we always go in saying we've got the greatest product, we've got all that, but then and that is you can certainly have conversations with customers on that basis. But then they start to look at the practicalities of it. Okay, what if it goes wrong? What's my support look like, etc., etc. So once you're then more local, either through a partnership or through having your own entity, then it makes that it takes that away. So you would actually accelerate your growth. But look, we are in challenging times. Let's say, I think SMEs typically do need to manage cost and risk quite well. So that's a way that they do that through partnership. But I do think the sort of the growth, you can see the growth of employer record stuff going on really around the world, so it makes it a lot easier now to just have somebody on the ground working for you to grow that market. So yeah, look, we believe in that. We believe in supporting. We do a lot of work actually doing the business development, even for companies, and the partner search. So generating opportunities, seeing that the proposition is landing, seeing what we need to do to tweak that proposition, but then also finding the right partners that can help them. So that would be the core of what we do, really, in the first instance of supporting companies. And then as they look to land, then they would look at, well, where should I land? Where should we set up? Where? And again, that comes down to sometimes the market, who are the customers, what's this, and the clusters, where are they? Is it sort of, fintech in Sydney, or is it, renewables in Brisbane or whatever, so it depends on where you want to, your sector. So that, and then we help advise them, but obviously talent is key. Talent's key everywhere, and especially I think there's quite a few technology firms on the call and interested in Australia from what we have seen. So getting access to the right talent, looking at university bases, looking at where you can compete for talent is really important as well.
So you can help businesses find potential channel partners. You're obviously aware of what opportunities there are in the market, and you've got those strong commercial contacts there to be able to lead people.
Correct. So we set up our office in Melbourne a couple of years ago, and been working very closely with companies, helping them in. So we've built up a really good understanding of the market, but also the network, right? That's why companies use us, really. Where we are a UK headquartered company, but we have offices in the major economies, 10 major economies around the world. So so we are seeing a lot more of that, where they just we're very good at. Because one of the big challenges for SMEs, I think, is they can be opportunistic, and therefore if they find a partner, they go, oh yeah, this is great, and they jump into sort of bed with the first partner. We try to advise against that because it goes wrong, and it goes wrong in a lot of cases. And it's not just the cost of getting out. There can be legal complexity getting out of some of those arrangements, but it's the opportunity cost. Right, and for us, we pay a lot of attention to finding the right fit. Where are they? What is their presence? Is there a cultural fit with the business, for example, as well? What's expected? What are they going to invest? What's their commitment, etc., etc. So we do a lot of that in terms of finding right fit partners for businesses in the UK.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, obviously we're working alongside these sort of businesses that are going down there, and we're helping put together these sort of structures. As we've mentioned, sometimes it is an evolution. You start trading with the market, you find potential opportunities, you put somebody on the ground, then you evolve into that subsidiary arrangement, and often you're we may help companies sort of put in place a holding company so that actually that is the owner of the subsidiary in Australia. Dimitri, I just want to pick up on a few key issues though about this sort of setting up an entity in Australia. Ones that typically come to the fore are around immigration, employment, always going to be a challenge for business expansion.
Yeah, of course. And there are always hurdles for, from a tax and compliance perspective, which we always need to be aware of. So, coming into Australia, hiring your first employee, that's assuming you're following the subsidiary type model, not too dissimilar to the same challenges Australian businesses have going into the UK. But certainly here in Australia, we need to start thinking about, payroll tax if there's a certain threshold amount of employees and the value of their salaries collectively. Obviously, compulsory superannuation in Australia is something that is a little different to the way that it works in the UK. And that can be an inclusive or a plus, if you like, to somebody's salary, but it is a compulsory superannuation that must be paid by an employer. We, of course, have workers' compensation insurance in this country, which we need to balance as well. So there are those logistical challenges that need to be addressed. But as Joel said, there are great firms such as HLB, Mann, Judd, who kind of manage that process on behalf of a foreign entity and corporation. And of course, similar when you are coming into Australia, thinking about what kind of structures, the employment model, for example. So you're going to employ people and have them as full-time, part-time or casual employees, and what are the pros and cons of doing that? We, of course, have a contractor model, and so understanding whether you can contract somebody to do a certain role here. There are some hurdles whereby if a contractor is working with you for 80% of their time over the course of the year, then, of course, you must also pay some superannuation, and there are some other hurdles which may be addressed. So it's not as simple as just putting boots on the ground and running. There are just some of those logistical and compliance boxes which must be ticked and rightfully should be ticked. And as Colin said, because of some of those compliance challenges, let's call them, but we are seeing the rise of employer of record as an option, which is essentially engaging a third party to employ somebody on your behalf and then just paying a full lump sum amount to that third party to employ that person. There are pros and cons, of course, to that model, but we certainly are seeing from an employment perspective, there are lots of different ways in which, you can have speed to market, which, as Colin said, often we think about, what is the cost, what is the risk, and what is the speed. That is a quick speed to market, but there are, of course, some risks that come with that as well.
Yeah, and another key thing is around intellectual property and how a UK company's intellectual property can be protected in that market. Perhaps a few sort of comments around that would be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I might shout out to Alexandra. I know she's got some good knowledge in this area as well.
Yeah, I think so. So again, it's quite similar to the UK system. We obviously have a system for registering trademarks. So particularly your kind of brand logo, any brand names that you're using and bringing out into the market, kind of getting registration of those in the Australian market is quite important. We do have a first use system rather than a first registration system. But obviously when you're expanding into a new market, getting an awareness of what's already operating in that market is really important as well. I mean, you might have a unique brand name logo in the UK market, but when you take that to Australia, you might find that there's actually someone that's already trading in this market with that. So doing your kind of due diligence, your searches, getting that understanding before you expand into a market as to how your brand is going to be, received, whether it's capable of being registered and protected here, is going to be a really important part of your process when you expand out here. And then obviously that can also lead to then some potentials of whether you do a country specific kind of brand if you are already having somebody operating in your market with the name that you want. So there can certainly be some challenges, and again, doing that early can save yourself a lot of heartache if you kind of hit the ground running, go and expand the market, and then 3 or 4 months later get a cease and desist from a local company can really kind of put the halts on your growth. So a really important kind of part of your expansion process is to kind of do that due diligence. And then there's similar kind of other areas that you might need to consider as well, depending on what your product is. So whether you have a patent that you need kind of registration protection for here, whether you have any particular design marks that you need registered here. There are some cases where you can kind of get that global protection. So kind of looking at your global IP strategy in terms of what you have registered in other markets, and trying to get kind of reciprocal protection in Australia, you can do as well. So kind of looking at your IP portfolio, and again, just doing that strategy piece about what you're looking to bring over into the Australian market, and implementing appropriate protections, whether that is a new registration or a reciprocal registration, or whether it's just kind of putting in place those protections with your local partners, particularly if you are using kind of a channel partner or a white label brand type arrangement here, making sure that your contractual protections are in place as well with any partners that you work with, and that the extent of the license rights that you're kind of granting to anybody are limited to the activities that you want them to do, so that you don't kind of, again, find 5-6 months down the track a partner that you're working with has actually been running with your brand and doing things that you didn't consent to or unaware of, which, you do see, unfortunately. As much as we would hope partnerships kind of go smoothly the whole time, you kind of prepare for the worst and hope for the best, other way around. But yeah, it's not an impossible kind of hurdle to overcome. And again, it's similar to the things that you will be doing in the UK, protecting your brand here. It's just ticking those boxes of making sure that you don't, kind of run too fast and forget to kind of get all your ducks in a row before you do that. It's very international expansion, as we are experiencing, is very exciting, and you can kind of want to get that big client and get that big opportunity without kind of actually making sure that you've got all those things in place to protect yourself as you do it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and obviously lots of really valuable insights that we've been able to sort of tease out of you today to just get an understanding of what it's like to do business in Australia. I realise the time is just coming up to the hour. I think we have a poll that we'd just like to launch before we finish, just to see what people have found interesting. Actually, what topic areas have we touched on which you found useful, you want to hear more about. We'd love to hear your feedback. Okay, I mean, looking at those, obviously there's a fair good spread. Everything that we've sort of been talking about has sort of resonated with someone, which is great to see. And I think just a couple of minutes to go, it would be quite nice, perhaps, just to go around and just hear your sort of final takeaway from the sessions. Perhaps, Colin, if there's one thing that people can take from this webinar, what would you say?
I think it's opportunity. I do think that, we've presented a market that is accessible, that is interested in innovation, and that is open to UK companies. So I think when we have complexity of Brexit and the challenges, and UK companies thinking about, where do I grow my business? I think Australia is very much a market that is both, large enough to justify the effort, let's say, and also accessible enough to be able to do that in a manageable way. So it would be around opportunity for me.
Yeah, and Roxana, just your sort of key takeaway. I know you gave one actually, but quite useful just to recap on that.
Yeah, no, I think I'm just echoing what Colin said. I think whenever there's challenge, there's always opportunity as well. And so, we are seeing a lot of challenges, not just in the UK, worldwide, but, there is opportunity as well. And so I think I'll just kind of echo the same thing. And from like government initiative perspective, look at some of those things in your sectors. Every year, the government releases a new kind of strategy in some of the key sectors and priorities and where that's going. So that's something kind of a good resource to take a look at and see where that may fit, where you can fit yourself in those key strategies. So that's it for me.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Joelle, what's your key takeaway from the session?
To invest the time and plan your journey into Australia, and feel free to reach out to people. Quite often people say that we're quite helpful with our networks and helping people understand the industry as well as the networks that are available and the support that's available. So feel free to reach out and take the time to plan and consider how you would like your journey to look here in Australia.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Dimitri, we had one question, perhaps we won't cover it now, but I'm sure it's probably one for you. And Scott asked, what are the opportunities or complexities for business owners plus 35? Are you happy to sort of handle that either offline or just a few comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, quickly coming into Australia, we don't have the 35 limit. That was more kind of Australia going into the UK. So there are obviously visa requirements that you have coming into Australia. So if you are an owner or a founder looking to come to Australia, there are some little visa wins that can be looked into, and certainly some great immigration agents and lawyers that will help with that transition across. There are different ways in which business owners and entrepreneurs can come into this country, whether it's in a sponsored or unsponsored way. I suppose just my takeaway is similar to Joelle's actually, which is actually that the strategy behind coming into a new country is critically important. As kind of Alexandra and our team have kind of known, we did a big planning session and all the steps that we needed in order to kind of effectively launch and operate in the UK. And that took us probably 6-7 months before we effectively had gone live there. And the same virtue is coming back into Australia and planning all these things, both from a compliance perspective, a legal perspective, an accounting perspective, and just a practical customer perspective. What are all the things that a business needs to tick off in order for it to be successful in this country? And then, of course, working through that slowly and getting the support that it needs. But, you know, cannot underestimate the value in strategy planning, particularly as you're going into a new market.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And it's all those timelines, isn't it? Working your sort of timelines out. How long is this going to take? And finally, Alexandra, just a few comments before we wind up.
Yeah, I think mine would be lean on the support that's available. I know from our experience that it's very overwhelming when you're kind of coming into a new market to just know what applies to me, what doesn't, where do I need to direct my focus on in the short, medium and long term. That can all be very overwhelming. But what we have found in the UK, and I'm sure is the same in Australia, is that there is a lot of support and there are a lot of people willing to have conversations with you and really guide you through that process as well. And so lean on that support. I when I first was expanding into the UK, kind of felt a bit hesitant reaching out to people, but everybody I reached out to was so willing to give time, resources, information, and I know everybody on the call is the same. So yeah, really lean on those people that are there to support you on that journey, because it will make the process a lot easier. And just you never know what you don't know, so get in front of people that do know and can get you that knowledge as easily as possible.
Yeah, well, fantastic insights, and thank you very much everyone for joining today and passing on your thoughts about doing business in Australia. And thank you to everyone out there for listening and to joining us on this webinar. We will be sending out a follow-up email that will include the recording as well as contact details, so you're absolutely free to get in touch with anybody from the panel who's raised points that you want to follow up on. So just to conclude, thank you for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.